Okay, when your HDRI is at the right level and you've got an override rendering that's looking quite nice and has kind of an average of what all your material colors will be, and you've got that lighting set up properly, I'm going to actually go back and set my override to a more white material again, because that is the rendering I'm going for. Okay, somewhere around there. Now let's start adding in some of these other lights to add to our HDRI coming from the outside. So what I'm actually going to do is just, the other main light sources in here are this, this, and this. So let's just group those again and call them, oh, I don't actually need to put the bracket in, just call them lights. And we'll go back into our override settings. Now those already have glass on them, so the light will come through the glass. But in our override settings, we just need to exclude now the lights, like so, and like so. Hit OK. All right, so now we're breaking down our lights so that we're only seeing kind of one at a time and making sure the effects of each is correct. So let's render this. Okay, there you go. So when adding in these other lights, it now becomes much brighter overall in our scene, and it's getting closer to what the final effect we're trying to achieve is, a very bright and airy, naturally lit room. The only thing I don't like about this is the candles. I want to turn those off because they don't make a lot of sense in a daylit room like this. But you can see the chandelier and the sconces are now putting off a good amount of light. And of course, I've already adjusted those to be basically what I want, but let's go back in and talk about what you would do to get them right for your particular project. First of all, let's take a look at those candle lights, which I'm about to turn off. They are very simple little spherical V-Ray lights. They're turned up very, very high because they're so small. Keep in mind that a small light at a high multiplier is similar to a big light at a low multiplier. Okay, so I think I've done tests on this before to figure out exactly, like if I made this 4 times bigger and then turned the multiplier down by 4 times, I think that puts off about the same amount of light. I'm pretty sure that's correct. But I definitely know that they are strongly correlated and proportionate to each other. So the candle lights are very small. I actually just made them invisible, and in Photoshop I added some little flames to them. But yes, they're very small because when you see them reflecting in the bottles and the glasses, you want them to just be a little tiny hot spot. So the size does matter, and it also puts off the right size. It'll put off a very crisp shadow because it's so small as well. So keep that in mind. But really, they're just default spherical V-Ray lights, which are just created by going to Light, V-Ray Light, and that one's planar. But after you create it, you can change it to spherical. And then basically just adjusting the radius and the multiplier. And then the color, because it's a flame, it's obviously going to have a very warm hue to it, like something like that. Sometimes you can exaggerate the color of the light even more, and it still works, depending on your scene. And that's where your white balance might come into play as well. So down here, it would just be, I think, all these things you would want on. You want it to put on little specular highlights on all these glasses. You want it to, maybe you could turn it off in reflections so that, like in a mirror or something, you don't have a crisp looking lit up sphere in a mirror. You don't want that, but I don't think that's going to be a problem in the scene anyway, so you can just leave it on. But that's the difference between specular and reflections. Reflections, like a mirror reflection, do you want to see that sphere in a mirror reflection? And specular means that it's, even if you can't see it in a mirror reflection, it'll still put specular highlights on all these little surfaces, which you definitely do want because that adds realism. So these lights are basically the same thing in here. The light bulbs are meticulously modeled, and again, this is purchased, so I didn't model them, but you can see the filament is actually modeled in there, and then there's just a light right around where that filament would be, and then a bulb around it. And so the essential thing here is that the glass is made to be a material that light will go through, and the important part of that is the effect shadows parameter inside of the glass, which I showed you here with this glass. Make sure that's checked so that light will shine through it when you're in V-Ray materials. And there's nothing special about the actual V-Ray light in there. I think most of you know how to create lights but I'm trying to show you some of the theory of how to light your scene in a good way. So this light, let's ungroup it and look at it just real quick, just to make sure there's nothing special going on here. It's nested in about 1 million groups. Okay, so whoever made this model made this a very warm light, which is right. You know from buying light bulbs that you can have a wide range of warmth to your light. You can even set it by an exact temperature, which is shown on the box of most light bulbs. The multiplier is 75 because it's much bigger than that candle light, and there's also a lot of them. So it puts off the right amount of light by adjusting it to 75. Here, this one's turned off for effect reflections because in those glass bulbs, you don't want to see a solid sphere of light. You just want to see the specular highlights that it puts off. Okay, so keep that setting in mind as you move forward. So that's really all there is to it, to the lighting in this whole scene, really. There's some decorative lighting back here, these little Christmas lights on this ring. Those are nothing special, just the same kind of thing. There's a little Christmas lights modeled back there and little lights attached. So if you go in here, you just see another tiny spherical V-Ray light in there. Okay, so the important part here is not how to create a light. That part's easy. We know how to create lights. But the important part is getting the balance of lighting just right and the exposure of your scene just right. You notice I didn't adjust the exposure of my camera at all. I could do that, but really you need to get the balance of light right, and then you can adjust your exposure up and down. It's best to get your lighting accurate and then adjust your exposure up and down. So another thing you could do is set this HDRI to 1 instead of 10 like we have it. Adjust your exposure so that your exposure gets much brighter for outside, and then this would all be relative to that. So these would have lower numbers on it because your exposure would get really high to make the outside exposed correctly at an HDRI multiplier of 1. Then these values all in here would change. So it's kind of all relative, but you just need to get the balance correct, which we basically have going on as we saw in our loss frame buffer. And we were able to kind of isolate each light, and our outside light looks right. We've got that nice blue bright light coming in from the window, which is right because the sky is blue. And then we have this nice warm kind of, you'd call this like a soft white light bulb inside, putting off the warmer light inside. And the overall lighting level is good for our scene. So we've broken down the light into individual pieces and made sure the balance is correct. Again, study photographs, study what it looks like. You'll see that the outside is brighter, and it's balanced out by interior light to fill in some of these shadows back in here. And we still have this side of these rounded objects being the brightest as they're facing that bright window over there. And you can see that back here on this pot and this wall. All those things are facing that window and getting, so these faces are lit up more. Okay, so these are all things to consider when you're working on your interior lighting.